Hello everyone, this is Jotto and welcome to the Hearthstone Weekly Show, episode 99. Yeah, almost at 100. Episode 100 is going to be my set comparison between Naxxramas and Blackrock Mountain. But anyway, so for this show, as some of you may know from my previous video, I am running a poll on what kind of format people would like to play in for the first tournament I'm running. It would not be every tournament, just the first one that I'm going to be running. So basically the two options were Classic and Limited, Limited being non-epic, non-legendary, and Classic being, well, just Classic being legal. So I thought, well, let's try and go over these formats and give people a bit more information about them. Now, Classic is a bit more predictable because anyone who's been around for the game long enough will probably remember some of that, and if you want some information on Classic, just go back to anything about a year ago. In fact, if you like, go back to some of my videos before Naxxramas was released, before the Naxxramas set review, and you should be able to find some information on Classic decks. With the exception of Miracle Rogue, which should get nerfed because of Leroy, and so did Face Hunter at the time. So, yeah, anyway, if you want any information on Classic decks, go back to those videos and check them out. So, what I'm doing is I'm going over Limited. Now, Limited, last time I played Limited was a year and a half ago, I want to say. It was before Naxx. Yeah, it was before Naxx. Interestingly enough, actually, Limited is a format which is near and dear to my heart because it is the first tournament Icebreakers ever played in, was the last Limited format tournament ever played, which was the last Mana Grind Limited tournament, and me and the two original members of Icebreakers, Grandpa Porky and Fire, played a Rogue Tempo list, and Fire got top 8 and I think I got 9th or 10th. So, really like Limited. It's actually what brought me back into Hearthstone after my break about a year and a half ago. So, I'm really kind of gearing to try and get this format going again. Now, the interesting thing about it is last time this format was played was base set. An insane amount of commons and rares have been added since base set, to the point where a lot of them break the design aspects because they're in adventures. So, one, you got the mechs, but two, you got things like Sludge Belcher is fairly new, Grim Patron's fairly new, rare. You got all these taunts and things which are very, very good against aggro. So what I'm doing for this video, this will probably be a longer video, is I'm going to go over the stuff that's missing from Limited, so epics and legendaries as quickly, and then some of the cards which I think will have a reasonable impact on the format. So, anyway, epics and legendaries wise, Druid, Cenarius basically, so a bit of late game there. Druid loses a lot in general. Hunter doesn't really lose anything in the legendaries. Archmage Antonidas, which makes any control builds weaker, also lose Pyroblast. Tyrion, big deal for Paladin. Vojin, kind of big deal, but I think Priest can live through that. It's mostly when they lose on epics. Edmund Van Cleef and Trade Prince, again, not the biggest ones. Shaman loses a ton in Alakir and Neptune, but again, not the biggest impact there. I think Warlock loses the most if you're building demons. Because both of these are late game bombs for the demon deck, especially Mal'Ganis is necessary, so I think legendaries do impact that. Warrior in general loses a ridiculous amount for control, Wallet Warrior as some people call it. You lose Grommash, but you also lose all of the really big legendaries. Dr. Boom isn't in the format, that's necessary. Actually, Dr. Boom isn't in either format because he's a GVG card. But, yeah, you lose things like Dr. Boom, no Ragnaros, Alexstrasza, all the big dragons. None of the big dragons. No Sylvanas is an interesting one. No Sylvanas, no Thorazan, no Lotheb, no Black Knight. So, be nice if it didn't keep skipping back every single time I change mana cost. No Harrison, making weapon deck stronger, no Leroy, things like that. There's a lot of legendaries, stop skipping back on me, which are actually fairly influential. Blood Mage to some extent. But yeah, there's a lot of legendaries that are fairly influential that just aren't in the format. Now, as far as epics goes, no, just epic, not epics. Yeah. Anyway, so epics is where things vary. Use Tree of Life, oh no, but the main ones are no Fawn combo, no Ancient Allure, no Ancient War. These are big deals. No Snake Trap, which is fairly, I guess is a fairly powerful card, but the rest you pretty much retain. Mage loses Ice Block and Pyroblast, making Freeze Mage impossible, and also Echo Medivh is a reasonable loss. And Paladin, Cog Hammer, Lay on Hands, and Quartermaster are big deals. Quartermaster, maybe more so than Lay on Hands. It means you can't play a fully mid-rangey Paladin deck, unless it's Dragon probably, because you lose Quartermaster. I don't know, maybe there is one. Light Bomb, fairly big deal, but you still have Vulcanite combo. Cabal. So there's quite a few epics to use. Preparation, again, I think Rogue is still possible. This is the interesting thing. Shaman loses a lot in legendaries, but they lose practically nothing in epics. You lose Doomhammer, and that's it. That's about it. None of the others see any sort of play. Warlock, much the same. You lose Bane of Doom, and that's about it. Warrior do lose a lot in Shield Slam and Brawl and Gorehowl. So that's a lot of their reliable removal gone. And the main big ones are, well, Doomsayer, but Freeze Mage is not really playable anyway. The main big epic that's lost, and that will impact the format the most, is Big Game Hunter. Now, Big Game Hunter is probably the best epic in the game. And is a big deal because it makes a lot of other cards that normally would be unplayable playable, as we'll get to a bit later in the common and rare section. So Big Game Hunter being gone is a big deal. Besides that, Faceless again stops limiting that. You lose all the giants. Yeah, lose all the giants and the Faceless. And Power to Sky Golem, not the biggest deal, but mostly it's a lot of the big stuff is gone. Not all of the big stuff though. So, let's see. Unfortunately, I can't actually filter out the epics and legendaries, which would be nice. But anyway, so what we're going to do is we're going to go through each class and neutrals and just go over a couple of the big cards, which will probably see a lot more play than you'd expect. Now, going through Druid, there's obviously the ones which are fairly expected, like Wrath and such. Nourish, maybe for some sort of ramp deck. Starfall, maybe it's a good anti-aggro card. There might be some Druid of the Fang build, because there's no Big Game Hunter. Mech Bear Cat, no Big Game Hunter, keep in mind. This could be an absolute bomb when you play it. Mech Bear Cat, big card advantage engine, especially since you lose Ancient of Lore. Recycle is possible, but I think the most interesting one is actually, if I can find this thing, Minecrafting mode, is that why it's just not there? Okay, I'm pretty confident I have every common and rare. So yeah, Volcanic Lumberer. Now this is interesting because Volcanic Lumberer is basically unplayable for two reasons. Black Knight, Big Game Hunter. It's too situational, and when it gets Big Game Hunter, you lose. However, imagine playing Volcanic Lumberer when they don't have access to Big Game Hunter. That's an 8 HP wall that you can play for 7, maybe 6 mana. I think that is worth testing, and you can run things like Poison Seed into Volcanic Lumberer and brick wall people. I'm not saying it's good, but I think it's a decent thing to test. Ironbark is obviously better than he is normally because, again, no Big Game Hunter. So I think Volcanic Lumberer is one that could be tested, and it's the kind of situations which come up which make things like that better. Now, as far as Hunter goes, there's a couple interesting ones. I mean, one that the class doesn't actually lose much, because most of things like mid-range Hunter are just commons and rares. But things like Deadly Shot may be better, simply because, again, things like Volcanic Lumber are not punishable, so it'll be more in the format itself. Besides that, though, Hunter, I think, gets changed the least, for better or for worse, out of anything. Again, no Snake Trap, which does make the deck worse against some classes. But I think Hunter is one of those classes that's less changed. You may think, oh, that makes it completely overpowered. But again, Druid can run a very, very high taunt count. Now, Mages is one of those classes which I think has a couple of different routes. Now, you can play Mech Mage, you can play Tempo Mage without Epics, or Legendaries. It'll be a bit weaker, but the point is the deck is still there. Now, weirdly enough, you do have access to Unstable Portal, which could in theory give you an epic or legendary, and you would be able to play it, but yeah, I think Tempo Mage is definitely a good alternative. You've got Flame Waker, rare. You've got a couple of very, very powerful cards at the rare and common rarities. Now, Paladin, first page of Paladin's terrible. But anyway, Paladin does retain equality. It does retain a lot of its early power, actually. Muster for Battle. You don't have Quartermaster, but you have Muster for Battle, Owl Lore. And the interesting thing about Paladin is you keep Dragon Consort. Now, Dragon Consort can be used with things like Azure Drake or Volcanic Drake. And you've got Solemn Vigil, maybe some draw power if you go for a very highly controlling build with something like Wild Pyromancers. And you could actually get a decent control deck because your opponent will have less really big stuff. And against aggro decks, you can play Guardian of Kings maybe because they won't have as many big things like Loatheb, for example, to get past you. So I think a lot of these cards, like Guardian of Kings especially, I think becomes a lot stronger because there's less large stuff in the format just to overpower it for its cost. So, on to Priest. Now, Priest does have Circle Combo with Orkanai. It still has Dark Cultist, Holy Nova, Shadow Madness. Now, it does lose a lot of the dragons, which means that Twilight Whelp is inherently worse. So Twilight Whelp gets worse, but besides that, it loses Light Bomb. That's a big deal. Cabal. Maybe there's some sort of mech build you can come up with upgraded Repair Bot. It might be doable. Now, Rogue does actually retain most of Oil Rogue. That's a big deal. Most of Oil Rogue is not legendary based. You do lose Thorazan and Loatheb. And you lose Preparation, being the biggest loss of the entire deck, as Preparation is in fact an epic. So maybe instead of going for some sort of Oil Rogue, you go a bit more tempo focused, maybe get some Defias Ringleaders or Goblin Altar Barbers, things like that. But I think Rogue is definitely a good class because a lot of their stuff is common and rares, and if you're expecting aggro decks, you've got the Dark Iron Skulker to really wail down on those aggro decks. So I think the first reaction from a lot of people was saying, well, the problem with Limited is that because you're losing all the legendaries and such, aggro becomes better. In theory, but a lot of ways of stopping aggro are at common and rare. Which means if you're gearing towards an aggro format, you can actually end up with a very mid-rangey focused format or even control decks. Now, Shaman is one of those things where they lose Neptune and Alkir, but besides that, I think this is a format where Shaman could shine. Shaman's really bad in Standard right now. But if you look at their card pool, they basically lose nothing. Fireguard Destroyer is a common, Fire Elemental's a basic. They only lose their late game, but I think you could easily run some sort of earlier game build, just go for some sort of value deck and really grind out those aggro decks. You still have access to Anti-Heal Vault, maybe play 2 of those, and just focus on beating the grindy decks and also the aggro decks, and I think you could achieve it. Maybe Shaman is the kind of build you want to go for if you want a very consistent deck, because it's much, much stronger in Limited than it's in Standard right now. Now, the interesting one here is Warlock, because Warlock loses Handlock entirely. However, before anyone says it's all Zoo, I beg to differ. There is, in fact, most of the Demon engine here. You do still have Mistress of Paint, you've got Demon Wrath, Hellfire, there's a lot of AoEs. You still keep Imp-Gang Boss. You've got access to things like Doomguard still, Voidcaller, Implosion. Most of the engine is still there. Now, what you do lose is Mal'Ganis and Jaraxxus. However, you still have access to things like Dread Inferno, which are very, very good against aggro. Even Floating Watcher or something could be tried out. But I think Demon Warlock is definitely still a decent build because you don't lose that much. Now, Warrior does get hit very hard. They lose Shield Slam, they lose Brawl, that's a big deal. You do still have Revenge maybe for board clear, but I'm not sure if that's reliable in any way. I don't know about Warrior. Warrior does lose an awful lot. Grim Patron is still a rare, but I'm not sure about Warrior. There might still be some sort of Grim Patron list you can play. Shield Maiden is a rare, you can still run that for some basic healing. But I think if there's a Grim Patron deck, it's going to have to be running some more healing to try and keep in the game a little bit more and be a little less combo-y. So most of the classes do still have an avenue into the format. Now, besides that, in terms of neutrals, most of the mech engine is common and rare. In fact, I'm pretty sure all of it is, besides Piloted Shredder and what, like Blingatron? Yeah, you can run pretty much the, not Piloted Shredder, Piloted Sky Golem. You can run pretty much the entire mech engine at common and rare level. Besides that, there are a couple of things that may become more popular, like Acidic Swamp Ooze, because weapon classes don't have to worry about Harrison anymore. There are a lot of powerful options. Mad Scientist still is around, which could be very, very useful. However, if we look a little bit later in this this pool, the Dragon engine is all common. Technician and Corruptor are both common. That's a big deal, because Dragon decks are not very powerful right now, but maybe if you exclude a lot of the control decks, do you think you could make like a Dragon deck that actually works? I mean, you still got Azure Drake, you still have Volcanic Drake. I think there might be something to work with here. And this is actually interesting. Draconoid Crusher is a 6-mana 9/9, basically, if you're running a more aggressive deck. Now, if you think about that, there's no Big Game Hunter anymore. You can't punish a 6-mana 9/9, which means potentially this could be very powerful. 6-drop dragon that's just absolutely way above curve, and I think you could get away with running something like that and be very, very strong. Sunwalker in a similar vein, you don't have to deal with Black Knight anymore, so you can just play him down, block a lot of the aggro decks. I'm a big fan of Sunwalker, it's just not that good right now. Now, in terms of later game stuff, this is where you do start losing out a little bit, because all the big stuff is legendary. So I think most curves will top out at 6, unless you're talking about things like Volcanic Lumber and Ironbark, for example. But most curves will top out at 6. But you do have a couple interesting options here in the Draconoid Crusher, and even Boulder Fist Ogre has seen a lot of play in Limited in the past if you're doing some kind of ramp deck. So I think before we close out here, let's see if we can just throw together a list. Now, in the past, the two most popular decks, at least in Limited from base set, were Ramp Druid and Midrange Hunter. Those are the two most popular, followed by things like Zoo and Tempo Rogue. So, if we were to actually try some sort of Druid deck, this is where I fail miserably because I haven't actually built a Limited list in ages. So, if we look at Druid and what kind of things we could run, we do still have Innervate, we still have Wrath, Wild Growth. We don't want Savage Orcs, we don't have access to Force of Nature. Druid of the Flame is good, you don't have Shade. Druid of the Flame is fairly good. Maybe a 1-up Starfall. Got my nice golden Starfall. I don't even remember when I got this. Swipe, Keeper, maybe a Nourish. Druid of the Claw is still good. Maybe some Mech Bear Cat. You've got Volcanic Lumber and Ironbark. And then in terms of early game, Zombie Chow is still a card. You still have access to Zombie Chow. So throw a couple Zombie Chows in there. Now this is my usual build a deck and then take stuff out later on. So let's see, is there anything really in this section which we want to build? We could try a token deck with just Savage Roars instead. That's maybe something to think about, build some sort of token deck. I don't think there's anything at that level. Now, what do we have in terms of 3-drops? We've got Spider Tanks, we've got Harvest Golem, maybe Mind Control Tech could be decent. Let's throw in maybe a Spider Tank. We do actually have Druid of Flame, so we can pass on 3-drops, I think. 4-drops, we do have maybe 1 Defender, and Piloted Shredders. Piloted Shredders are still here. You could maybe run a Kesant Mystic instead of the Defender. Sen'jin's still an option if you want to run that kind of build with a bit more taunts. Into the 5-drop slot, we've got maybe 1 Anti-Keelbot, some Azure Drakes. I am at 30 cards, which means I need to take stuff out. This is always the thing with deck buildings. You need to kind of select where you want to be going. Sludge Belcher is a big deal. So if we're going for a bit more tone focus, I think take up the Ironbarks. Get some Sludge Belchers in there. That's very, very nice. And in terms of 6-drops, let's see, what do we got? We've got Mech Bear Cat at 6-drop slot. So if we're aiming to kind of just get out a big threat here, I think we can maybe cut down a little bit on the 4-drops. Maybe on 1 Shredder. Keep the Nourish because you don't have that consistent draw. So I think what you want is a second Azure Drake. You don't have, basically the main point is you are missing Ancient Allure. So you need to kind of compensate for Ancient Allure. So what we've got here is we've got Nourish for a bit more consistent draw, Azure Drakes, and in terms of healing, an anti-heal bot. Besides that though, and also Mech Bear Cat is very, very good at the 2-for-1s. I think this would be a decent list to kind of start with because the deck is less aggressive, so things like Draconoid Crusher is not as good. So this would be some sort of base list. That'd be some sort of base list for a Druid deck, and I think what we'll do is we'll do one more. So let me just get rid of one of these random. Most of these are really old. Like if you look at some, they've even got BK Buffet still made. That's a fairly old list. So if we look at something else, like let's see, what could we look at? Maybe Paladin. Like I'm staying away from Hunter because Hunter is fairly obvious. Like if we just go into the mid-range Hunter list I have been playing. Most of this you could play, just take out Boom and Loatheb and sub out some stuff and put some other things like Shredders maybe in there, and you could definitely pull something. Where did this... Oh, right. That always dupes me. Alright, so if we're thinking about Paladin, first of all I don't want any of this stuff. Maybe Blessing of Might is a conceivable option. Let's try running some sort of more controlling style deck. So we still have this for the early game. Elder Peacekeepers, Truceovers, Golden Consecrates, thank you. Scarlet Purifier's been seeing a bit more play recently, maybe 1 Solemn Vigil, some Dragon Consorts, and maybe 1 or 2 Guardian of Kings. You don't have Leo on hand, so maybe 1 or 2. So, in terms of 1-drops, we can get 1 off Zombie Chow. We'll put in 2 and maybe remove a second one later. Zombie Chow, maybe get some Wild Pyromancers. Wild Pyromancers are extremely good with the quality. Alright, besides that, as far as 3-drops goes, we could maybe run a Blackwing Technician 3-drop. Let's try Blackwing Technician. Run a bit more of a mid-rangey dragon type style. See, do we have Hungry Dragons? Maybe. Azure Drakes, Corruptors, and I've run out of space. Let's take a Hungry Dragon. Put in Corruptors. Maybe we want to take out the Blackwing Technicians and just run Corruptors, Azure Drakes, and maybe Draconoid Crushers and a Volcanic. Probably nothing at the 7-drop slot. I mean, we got Guardian of Kings at 7-drop, so if I look at the general curve there, let's see, maybe 1 Wild Pyro. I mean, Wild Pyro is good with Solemn Vigil. Again, you need a bit more consistent draw because you're not playing Lay on Hands, which is a big deal. Actually, this deck isn't very aggressive, so let's try and add a second Drake, and then maybe, if we're running that, maybe a second Vigil. Not sure I like second Vigil, actually. I don't think that's very good. Might be worth considering, though. Guardian of Kings is a fairly decent late game drop. How many dragons are actually in the deck? 6? I think 6 is conceivable with Blackwing Corruptor. I think second Vigil, though. You're running Consecrate, Wild Pyromancer, Quality. Maybe there's something that can be done with this particular list. Again, these are very, very rough, and I don't think these are like solid lists, considering these are very, very quick drafts. But anyway, so the main point is there's a lot more options than you'd think for these kinds of decks. Like, as I said, when it came to mid-range Hunter, you probably just take standard list and take out Boom, Loatheb, add in probably 2 extra 4-drops. Like in this list, I think I just add in 2 Shredders, or maybe a second Houndmaster and a Shredder, or something like that. Leave the Kaznim because you're expecting Mad Scientist to be a very powerful card in that format. That's actually a valid point. Maybe put Kezanen on the limited paladin list. So there's a couple things you can tinker around with, and I think the format's a lot more diverse than people are making it out to be. Just from having looked at it recently. Yeah, take out Zombie Chuck. That's designed to be aggro decks and put in a Kezanen instead. But the format has been made out to be very, very aggro friendly. And while I think that's partially true, having looked, and that would have been true back in base set and Naxxramas Limited, especially in Naxxramas Limited, where aggro decks would have been very, very powerful, but now you've got things like Volcanic Lumberer and the Dragon Engine and things like that, and I think there might actually be something to be done with Limited that's a bit more interesting. But anyway, that's pretty much my ridiculously kind of, sort of in-depth, overview of what I think Limited could be. And depending on the format that gets chosen overall, I think I'll keep votes going until like Monday or something. And depending on the format that actually gets chosen, I'll make a video about the kind of decks which I've been testing for that particular format, and make a video kind of going over some of the decks you can think about for that format that will either be classic or limited. But I just wanted to make this video because I think a lot of people haven't really looked at the card pool when it comes to limited, and there's a lot more diversity than you'd expect just by removing epics and legendaries. But anyway, thank you all for watching. If you like the content, please subscribe. If you have any feedback, put it in the comment section below. But as now, this has been Jotto, signing off.